Davey, the reason why I wanted to bring you on the show, you are known for building design systems. You have your own podcast. You have such a wealth of knowledge. And I think I came across you before actually seeing you at Ben Callahan's kind of question and answers workshop. And I wanted to speak to you on many levels about how design systems in general have, as you say, matured over the last 10 years. And my first question was really around how do you get companies to invest in design systems? Because, and before you answer that question, I've spoken to a lot of people who struggle to see, well, no, they struggle to actually communicate to the business the value of a design system. So, what's your 2 cents on that?
I don't think that it's for everybody. So a lot of times I hear stories about a design systems team of one. So one organization or group that we're involved in, Into Design Systems, a great conference that we've been like a part of for the past 2 years. They do a lot of coverage and talks for people that are teams of one. So a lot of times when we're first starting off, we're trying to really bootstrap this and get it off the ground. So either it's a designer, hopefully it's a designer and an engineering pair that are working on possibly like a new feature, a new product area, and they have this aha moment. Maybe we could be building this smarter or more efficiently. And that's how it starts. Like we really want to
Mm-hmm.
start with 1.5 people. The half could be in either direction, but there needs to be some lead. And if you could do this in a bootstrapped way and let's say I'm going to put some money in this design system piggy bank for 6 months and start building something. So maybe you're building like a token structure. Maybe you're building like a new API to interface with future components you might be like building. Maybe you're building a DesignOps process on design delivery and rethinking that. But those are sort of things that I like to think of it as a investment into a program, which I think
Okay.
to you all is like very like much easier to understand. So, and then when you say program, you start to sort of slice it. Like what parts of the program do I want to achieve first? So maybe you want to achieve the front end side of this. If this is like an engineering led initiative, maybe you want to achieve the component side. Eventually you'll want to then see, oh, well, we're doing like design, we're doing some front end stuff. We're going to need to then invest a little bit into like documenting this. And when I say documenting, it doesn't need to be such like a mythical thing where you have to invest in a doc site. This could be wherever you feel is the best place for designers and engineers to interact with things. So it could be as simple as like a Google site. It could be a Notion site, anywhere that you think is easy to just disseminate information.
See, this is where it comes down to the question that a lot of I've seen a lot of designers over the last 10 years where they have just they have just strapped on certain design systems to cut down the amount of development and design that's needed. And I've seen this happen, or I think everyone's seen this happen with the explosion of material design or bootstrap. And do you think this is why companies don't want to invest in how should you say, a full-fledged system that's built from scratch, and they would rather strap on something that's already pre-built?
You can. So I've also met a lot of folks that are starting by using material. Eventually, you might mature to the point where you're at a fork in the road where you might want to get off of that and start your own thing. And it is important to think about when you're doing this planning and you're working with like your design leadership, maybe your like design ops leadership about whether there's a possibility that this team will grow. And if you see that the goal would be if you could grow from 1.5 people to 3 people, then there's a decent success that you'll be able to continue this on. And you want to, as best as you can, future-proof that decision of whether you should go to Bootstrap or Material or another like open source like system. Because if you do go that route, eventually you're going to have to potentially like refactor and unwind.
Yeah. I think that's what I've experienced. I've experienced that when companies have, or places I've worked in, when they have bootstrapped these full-fledged design systems, there's so much hacking that's needed in order to get to designs. And what comes out of it is that they find out, hey, we should have built this from scratch. Now, I tend to go down the route of, people who have children, they let their child hit their head on the coffee table because they have to make that mistake. And I guess I'm trying to get the message across that to people who are listening to this podcast or directors who are listening, how can we advocate to build a design system from scratch? What benefits does it bring over something that's pre-built?
Yeah, I think it's just you'll find that you'll be able to build it exactly how you want it. And like what I did, the reason why I mentioned APIs and component APIs and schemas is like your front end team may have a certain way of building. Like the simplest like translation might be like if you're using React, like you have like your properties set in a certain manner, you have it scaffolded in a certain way. Material may not follow that one-to-one. And like as you astutely pointed out, if you're taking something out of the box and you're doing all these like modifications, and on like the Figma side, it's as if you're taking a core component and you're doing all these overrides. At some point, if this thing gets updated, there's some risk that you're not going to receive all these updates because you've sort of gone and customized this thing like so much that it's like so far from the like original like canonical source. So it's more of if you have a lot of heavy customizations that you want to do, that's I think where you want to think about whether you should build on your own. But like you said, it might be also like a thing where maybe you just try to build something for 2 weeks in a sprint and use Material or use Bootstrap or use a different one of like the newer open source, or not open source, but maybe one of the newer frameworks that are available, and see where it gets you. I know some of the ones now, especially that are tied to Figma and React, are more like atomic in nature, so it's much more flexible for you to compose in different manners. But always trying it and seeing if it's going to do like what you need it to do, I think is like a good place to start.
One of the key things I've seen, and I think you kind of spoke about it in the workshop with Ben Callahan, is that do you think before people commit to a design system, they should actually have an adoption strategy from both the designers and the developers before even committing to the amount of work that's going to be needed?
I think it's probably a direct tie to either adoption or like how does this drive business value. And like the easiest way to show that is if you're able to help like a colleague that's working on something, you help them ship this faster by X time. So that's one strategy. Depending on size of team, adoption is like is an odd one, because like if you're in, let's say like an agency, right, and you're building this as like a client facing project, you could develop some adoption strategies just based on like usage, insertions, replacement of components over time if they had something or existing that you're replacing. But as like an agency, you're not going to be able to see it through. Like measuring adoption from that sense, if you're an agency designer, may not make sense. But if you're in-house, adoption is also like a tricky one, because what if you only have you're in a startup and you have maybe 3 to 5 product designers,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like then you may not be as tied to adoption as like your main like measurement. You may be tied to just a straight velocity. This is helping the team ship stuff weeks faster, and then it may not sound like weeks is like a big deal, but like getting something out a few weeks earlier in the grand scheme of like a business is a big deal to a lot of stakeholders.
I'm going to take a different stab at some questions. I think one of the key things I always see, and I think why design systems also get a bad rep, is the technology moves very, very quick. So, when a company has dedicated their resources into investing in a design system and they built it on Angular, and I would say about 5 years ago, I would say that conflict of React and Angular.
Angular Vue.
Yeah, and they were just battling between each other, and then I think everyone was caught in the line of fire of like, which tech stack are we going to invest in? And then obviously people who have invested in Angular are now going through this kind of migration process of, changing it over, especially with web components now coming into it. This is, the technology just moves so fast, and this is something I see product managers, or generally I would say people in tech leads are struggling to then say we should go back and revamp the code base. Now, I want to get your 2 cents on this. What is the best strategy to choose the best tech stack for a design system?
Oh, I remember. Oh, this was a long time ago. This was over like 10 years ago when I was at Goodreads, and we had Goodreads was at the time built on like Ruby on Rails. That was like the hottest thing. We'll age ourselves here. The hottest thing at the time. And yeah, there was
like 10 years ago.
Yeah, over 10 years ago. So there was a decision whether we would go to React or Angular. Vue wasn't a part of that discussion, but I remember, much like I had mentioned before, like the easiest way to sort of decide is to spike the work. And I think they might have took like 12 weeks just to build in both and see how it interacts with like our internal systems on Goodreads. And they picked the right choice. They picked React, so like the work that they're doing is still they're still able to leverage it. It's sitting on its own. But I feel like it's most important to see like what works best within your org and within your tech stack. It is odd to me that like coming from like a design point of view, like we have they teach us certain things like over the course of time about tools. Granted, like the tools that they taught us and the tools that they're teaching now is widely different. They taught us like Adobe tools back in the day, but for engineers that go through school, they don't teach them React. They teach them fundamentals. They teach them like computer science, like theory. And it's really like, from when I've talked to like new grads, it's really like a hodgepodge of like, if you go into an org, maybe you have to learn Vue, or maybe you have to learn Angular, or in most cases you'll have to learn like React or like that sort of thing. And they figured out it's similar. So it's the learning curve, I feel like isn't really the thing. It's really the cost of when you choose to make the migration. And I think that's hopefully like at some point you'll get like the engineering side of design systems to talk to, and I think they'll be able to give you some more insight on that.
I'm going to take also a different step. Obviously, we're a DesignOps company, and there's going to be a lot of designers listening to this. Now, how can designers move into that? Well, would you say designers should move into a developer mindset when they start making design patterns and design components, to really see like, one, the tech debt that comes with it, and two, the understanding of how a design system on the coding base works. Do you think that helps designers formulate their designs in a much more better way if they had that development knowledge?
Oh, 100%. And I do wish that, like, one thing that I think helps a lot from like the design side, obviously, is like as you're designing components, utilizing Nathan Curtis's 8-shape specs tool, because it breaks it down
Brilliant.
and builds the anatomy of this. But we need that on the React side. Like, it would be great if there was, like, I haven't found it, but we have tools internally at Meta that is tells you about like component dependencies. So just think of this crazy mind map, and just maybe, let's say, a component list, and list is comprised of list items. Within list item is different slots for the list item. So if you were to look at that list component, you'll see all these different dependencies. I think another important thing is to understand like where this thing is being used. So if you have that understanding of how these things are like composed and built, what are the moving parts and the dependencies, where are all the use cases that this is being used, so you could sort of build upon that. I think that's more or less like the barrier of entry, I feel like, for people. And then I like, because a lot of times when you're a generalist and you're designing specifically for your product, you're very laser focused on your very specific use cases, and you're making all these modifications. But oftentimes people will come to the design system team and say, oh, I need an enhancement on this component because it's not doing this thing. So either I request a enhancement or I make my own thing. And I think there may not be a full picture of what they may be requesting. The design system team, I feel like, is able to see very far and wide and say, well, the goal, I think a big goal of us is to say like, oh, I feel like, PJ's working on this and Davy's working on this thing. Why don't you all talk together, and maybe we could like form an alignment on like this pattern that you all are working on, and then we could ship it at the same time.
But then it ties into this next question I'm going to focus on. I think, can design systems be too rigid for developers as well as designers? And because I have seen that even though you can devise a design pattern, developers will still break it in some sense. It depends if it's a full-blown recipe and anything like that. But generally, I have seen developers break a lot of the design patterns to fit a requirement and stuff like that. And this is where I want to get your 2 cents. Is it the case that we are building design systems, or we're over-engineering design systems to be too rigid from your opinion?
I think the rigidness is, so when we worked at Disney Streaming, on Disney Plus specifically, it was super, the processes were super rigid. So we had like meetings to then like review work, like sprint style, like where we would review work and we have stakeholders in the meeting, yay or nay the work. And the whole, I think, success of the system and being in DesignOps was that like we would say, we know exactly what's going to happen in these meetings. We know what the engineers are looking for. If you work with us in office hours or like in a consultation manner, we'll be able to help you build and get this thing approved, because we know that they're going to ask for these types of interactions, these states. They're going to ask for any sort of like null states. They're going to ask for how this may localize. Like, we know all of the things that they typically ask for. That was a super rigid process. It wasn't necessarily, it was semi-agile, but it was waterfall at the same time, because it was sort of like a gate. But if you don't have a lot of the discipline and rigidity up front, it's going to be extremely hard years down the line to sort of bring that forward. Like, this goes back to the question workshop that I was a part of about micro adoption. I don't think that like a high number of adoption, let's say like a lot of people try to hit 80% or 100%. I'm not sure if that's the thing that I personally believe is the most important, because what if theoretically you use all of the base components? Let's say you use a card component and then you use a lot of like the header components of the card, like the footer with the buttons, but you just needed to shift things around. But you used all the right tokens and primitives to build this thing. Does that mean that your thing is not compliant because it's not a component? No, it's still compliant because it's built using the right stuff. And in fact, like I think the foolproof method is like if in the event that your team evolves your brand and your theming, does this component stay up to date? Most likely, yes, because it utilized the primitive. So from that sense, that high adoption number trying to hit 80% or, God forbid, some product owners say, we're going to hit 100%. That's our goal. And you're really shooting yourself in the foot by trying to get to that. So the rigidity, I think, is using using and taking advantage of the program, making sure that you're using as most as you can, but being trying to figure out where you stand on that scale of being opinionated. Do you want people to just use things one for one? Because if you do, then you got to build in the work to build recipes and make sure that you follow along at how people are utilizing this like one for one, which is also okay. But I think it's much harder, at least these days, like with teams that are under-resourced.
Davey, I've always seen, and I've seen a lot of design systems where they're full-fledged, built from the ground up and everything. And what I've always noticed is that the design program managers, and that's just from my experience, you could tell me if I'm right or wrong with this one, I have seen them be very, very strict with the code cadence of this. Now, obviously, every developer works in a different way, but what I'm struggling is that, is it just wasted resources to be so rigid with the code cadence on how people use the components, how they're building the models, how they're connecting data into some of the components?
Yeah.
Do you think that it's just a wasted resource, but there should be a basic understanding of the semantics and how the markup should be?
Like, I think you'll talk to folks that I think it's and I think my tune has changed like over time. Like when I was supporting a team of 30 product designers utilizing this, and 30 product designers, I think for a lot of people in the teams of one is a lot. And like the scale of product design teams, I feel like it's like a small, medium sized team. When you're supporting a team of 30 designers, I think you could be more rigid because you're able to see everything that is going on. And like in the interest of even like our situation now where we're supporting hundreds of designers, I would love to be able to see everything that's going on, but it's not feasible for us to be in all these places and all of these like specific team critiques. So for example, you could be in an organization like Meta, and like I've supported both business design systems as one pillar, and then now I'm supporting internal tools. Like each one of those pillars has many different tools and applications, and it's near impossible, at least I'm told, and I believe it, to be in all of these critiques at one time. Like, not only is it not possible, like I don't think that there's an interest in us poking around, and like soon they'll ask the question, hey, why is this Davy guy here like poking at our stuff? He's not on our team, So we try to then govern in a different way and provide guidance on this is how we believe that you should be building. Like these are the best practices. If you're interested in codifying this and graduating it up into a component, I think this is very close, and offer like more encouragement and support. Because I think at the end of the day, if you're hitting this from just a rigidity standpoint, they're not going to want to show you show you work. Like
Yeah.
I think if we hit it from the lens of a design quality, like accessibility, maybe just like code cleanliness, then I think eventually they'll come around and say like, oh yeah, I would love to have like our deliverables and our like documentation the design system team, because I feel like it's like very well put together. They're able to articulate themselves, and we're able to be sort of like the bar, as crazy as that sounds, the high bar that we should be hitting.
I see a lot
Mm.
of design system managers or design program managers where they follow a rigid guidance on what components should be going into the core system. Because
Yeah.
I'm a believer that you cannot have one core system that just suits all. You would always have a core design system, and then obviously those recipes are made outside. I call them UI kits in a better way from a design perspective. I wanted to get your take on, should design systems evolve in the sense of building UI kits to be sustainable for multiple products? Or do you think design systems should, or applications should actually just use one design system for everything?
I mean, that's the ideal. If you're able to start and have a scaffolding, like IA architecture of the component library dependencies, like this is going to be the core system. This is going to be above that will be a specific Disney system. This is a specific Hulu system. Then you're able to plan ahead and say, like, every time that we create a component or pattern, we are looking to build it for all the applications.
Okay.
So then you're thinking, and we started thinking about this, like when we're working on Disney Plus, working on things like without a theme, without any sort of like branding on it, because we want it to be applicable for multiple brands, and we wanted to apply the theming
Whoa.
like further down the line.
White label. You're talking about white label.
White label, yeah. And how that really sort of came to head was prior to a lot of us working on Disney Plus. Like we were working at a company called BAMTech. BAMTech created like streaming applications for baseball, but we also created a streaming application for like WWE, the wrestling, and we were oftentimes creating white label things like a white label video player, and we would then sell it to companies as and sell the service as a part of like a package. So I think astutely that was a very good way of thinking. It is I think the harder part of the question is like looking at Meta now. There's many different design systems, and obviously, like depending on who you talk to, they'll say, well, why doesn't this just coincide with it being one system to rule them all? But
Yeah.
we have underlying foundational design systems, but then each individual product has their own, because each individual product came into the portfolio at a different time, right? So obviously Facebook's been around for the longest, but then we pulled in Instagram, then we pulled in WhatsApp, then there's like Horizons, Quest, whatever like we called it. There's all of these different product areas that have their own unique needs. So there's a need for at least a two-tier approach. The foundational system that might serve you like brand, or more atomic primitives like brand spacing, that sort of thing. But there's a need for specific product systems itself, and they could be in the form of like UI kits or sticker sheets. They could be full-fledged systems like we have with React components, their own documentation site. It really depends on like how far you want to go, and that's like the beauty of this whole thing too. Is once you get to that point, it's like pretty mind-boggling how wide like this stuff could be, and how it sort of can trickle back down to like the core system.
I think white labeling is a different ball game altogether. I think that is a design system Rubik's Cube because, when you're building a white label system, you need to, well, it's not like you need to. I think the challenges is building it to be sustainable that anyone can just strap their brand onto it. So you're building it with like a grayscale structure, but then somebody comes in with their brand and you find out they've got like 6 different colors in their primary branding color, and you're just like, oh wow, how do you even accommodate for that? Do you know what I mean? So it is a massive different ball game.
Yeah, I always like to keep thinking back onto like content management systems, and like if you're familiar with like Vox Media, so Vox Media is like a media company that has multiple like properties that are well known here, like in the States. So there's Vox Media, like Vox.com. There's The Verge, which is I think one of the more popular ones, but they're all built off the same CMS, and like they have drastically different themed components and templates. If you think of it from like the CMS point of view, or even as simplified as like, I hate using this word, like think about like WordPress themes and how those can transform things. That's sort of how you sort of could think about reuse beyond like your own product area.
Enjoying the content? Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on LinkedIn, TikTok, and Instagram for more updates. Your support helps us bring you even more great content. Now let's get back to our podcast.
But then you bloat. You end up building up components with loads of variations when you try to build a white label system that needs to adapt to the brand, because they could have input fields in a different way in their corporate website compared to what they're going to have on their white label product. And I think that's why when I built white label systems in the past, and from a design perspective, this is where I start putting my developer hat on. It's been years since I've been doing development. But yeah, you really do bloat up the system due to the fact that you need to have a multitude of variations to strap on and sell to your clients. So I find it much more simpler when it's been just one brand and you dealt with one brand that's got multiple products, because it's like as Meta has, they have multiple products, but you have that centralized core system, and then on top of it, you have these kind of layers that are just scaffolding the core components, but putting their own twist in it, and it's kind of maintained and managed itself. Again, it's been a long time since I've done development. I wish I went back into it, but I want to kind of take a stab at one of the things that I'm noticing, and now it's actually, in my day when I was doing design, developers and designers were really clashing, but now the relationship has got way more better, and I think I see a good respect on both sides. But how do you empower teams to, evolve the design system and make decisions together? How do you empower that kind of collaboration between designers and developers?
Yeah, I think the most important part is to understand the point of view of where the engineers are coming from. Sometimes it's just purely based on time. So they turn down or reject certain tasks based on like time bandwidth, that sort of thing. If you dig a little deeper, most likely they'll explain like, well, if I'll give an example. We are looking at adding like a reset button into input fields. So why that's important is like you're doing a bunch of modifications to a specific, let's say, ad campaign. Like I'll just use that as an example. You do 10 changes, but it's in a form of 30 changes. You want to be able to see what things you've been highlighting, and you might want to just, instead of just nuking the whole thing and starting from scratch or going back to the last iteration, you want to just maybe reset a few items like one by one. On the onset, from a design point of view, that's not too difficult. That's like pretty easy. But when we talk to engineering about it, I think for their specific product area, it's not too difficult to update. But if we want to make this a system-wide change, it's going to be the onus on them to check all the different inputs. And inputs obviously is a tricky one because they show up everywhere, similar to buttons. So it's if this engineer wants to make this change, we're really going to have to go through and see all the dependencies that are involved and make sure that it's implemented properly. And the way that we do that is just to have an understanding of, like, when we're designing these things, like what you do over here is going to tug on the string and affect what this other person is doing. So at least working in design systems, you see that. I think teaching designers is like a whole different thing. And one, like the most easy mechanism is to try to get them in the system mindset by doing audits. So if they're looking to change like these like more advanced input fields, what else in the product suite has this pattern? In smaller products, you might not have as much of like an issue because you could just tap the other designer and say, well, I'm thinking about aligning this, and then you could have a conversation and negotiate that. But if these editable inputs may sit on 10, 15 different products, then good luck. You're going to have to provide a solution on how you're going to modify this for those like 10 to 15 folks.
Davey, I'm going to play devil's advocate. I think one of the biggest issues that designers have with developers is, how should you say, the accumulation of UI debt, even though you have a design system. I think it's one of the biggest pains that designers have. It's like whatever they've designed, even though there's a design system there and they follow the guideline, why do you think there's so much UI there? Or generally, why is there that thought that, you know, the developers are not following what has been handed over from designs?
It's likely like it's a combination of things. So another way I think designers could work better with engineers is it's not a one-size-fits-all on how engineers like to receive deliverables. So like I think in the past, like at Dizzy, we use Zeppelin, and we're able to work with engineers on a very specific way that we would hand off like screen and component design. And over the course of a few years working with them, like 3 to 5 years, this group has gotten accustomed to this specific portion. I think in a less rigid organization, there's going to be some designers that are just marking stuff ready for dev and Figma, some designers that will send you into like the abyss in their file, and good luck. You know, there's some designers that are very articulate with writing like exit criteria, acceptance criteria on their tickets. You really need to understand like how your teams like to work, because if they don't get what they need, what they're going to do is just pull a screenshot of this thing, just eyedrop it, and go from there if it's not easy to find. Because I think there's also an expectation that engineers can just go into Figma and inspect, and it's easy. Mm-hmm. But you could also make that a little easier by just spelling out what this is live, what this is going to change to, and then link to a very specific like visual. And then over time, hopefully they'd be able to use Figma to inspect. But I think that's like the best advice for anyone in design systems or design ops is never assume anything. Never assume people know, because they may not just have come across the time where they had the opportunity to learn the things.
Davey, I'm going to do some product placement now. Yeah. I mean, you know, one of the key things that we do in Design Align is we're still in the old school phase. So we don't have dev mode as a basic standard that when we work with companies, say, hey, look, you need to strap on dev mode to do a handover. Actually, what we do promote is that old school way of handover of like H-shaped specs, pure spec documentation, you know, behavior documentation, all the tokens, depending if your development team have strapped on tokens, but we find that has a better reception. And obviously we tell them to do some form of persona analysis on developers. So do they like high levels of documentation? Do they like medium-sized documentation? Or do they like the full-fledged? And that's how we kind of promote it with businesses to optimize their handover process. So, we're still in that old school phase. Like, look at the spec, get the right dimensions, and pretty much we see a massive reduction by doing it like that. So what's your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I think it really with the tools now, I would prefer not having to do any manual red lines. And before H-shaped specs was available, you would have to use other tools to click on something, generate some silly red lines and pointers. And like I think the funniest thing now is like in Figma, you're able to like do some modifications to your red lines, which is what I did like 10 years ago. I redlined something and I thought, oh, the spacing is 13. It's not supposed to be 13. I'm just going to click on the type tool and change it to 12.
Yeah.
No one's going to inspect this and see. I think the best way is to just have folks inspect it and build an understanding of the file, but that's not how all engineers like to work. So I think the next approach is to have all that stuff like laid out in the specs, which with it being automated, I think is fine. If we would have to build that from scratch, I would absolutely not want to do that.
Yeah, no, agreed. And I think the reason why I kind of promote the H-shaped specs is that when you follow a design freeze principle, and obviously you've handed that file over, I noticed that when you give developers a chance to inspect it, they just move stuff and break stuff. And, I get that. It's a design freeze. You shouldn't really worry. But generally, you go back, when you do regression testing and you want to go back and look at it and say, hey, is it one-to-one? If design freeze has been manipulated by a developer and they've moved it around, that regression testing just goes out, and, anyone who's listening to this podcast that doesn't know about H-shaped specs and you do want to use it, you do have to follow a strict, rigorous naming convention for your layers. You can't have something called group 2, 5, 6, 8. You really have to follow some strict guidelines. And obviously, using auto layout allows you to get the right spacings and margins and padding. So there is a bit of a learning curve from this tool. I know me and Davy are speaking about it very easily, but you do have to follow some rigorous process in your Figma files if you do want to use it. Davy, did you want to say something?
I just thought of something that sort of makes it even easier. So if you're handing off things like much like I used to do at Disney, like in large chunks. So if you're handing off screen level designs, I think something that's a little easier, especially if you're using like H-shaped specs to spec, or if you're doing this manually, is to start shipping stuff and handing things off in like a smaller portion. So you obviously can hand off the template and the screen itself, but then maybe you have a header task, like a ticket. Then you have a content area, maybe a navigation ticket, and you start breaking these down. So I think the big like learning curve and the big like pain point for engineers is like being focused on what they're supposed to do. They are most of the time a single engineer could build the whole thing, but they're going to not be working on everything at one time. So they're going to be working on distinct pieces of it. So I think that's very helpful. It also simplifies like what you're reading out in the spec or what you're inspecting.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like with complex components or complex prototypes in general, you have to break it down, because what you will end up with is a massive encyclopedia of components that are just, it doesn't do it justice, because the developer would just be like, no, I'm not going to look at this. But if you break it down in small, I'm a developer as well by trade. So I know that if I'm going to look at that, I'll just be like, forget this. I'm just going to try and figure it out and click it myself. So, David, before we wrap up, I think one of the key things I wanted to get your opinion on, and this is a big subject for people who do work in design systems. what is the best naming convention for tokens? Now, you do know, you must have come across this where designers are using so many different color palettes, like, you know, primary 100, primary 800, black 87, you know, you name it. And there's just so many different tokens out there. Now, what do you think is the best naming convention when it comes down to this?
Yeah, I think the easiest way to future-proof it, I would say, is probably have at least 2 tiers of tokens. So you would have the base or the raw data tier, which is all just values itself. So you might have a group that's color, and in that color tier, that grouping collection, whatever you may call it, those are the red 100s to 1000, and you don't need that many. I think if you do the 100 scale, you have 10 different values of red, which is sufficient. Then you have spacing there, and the spacing could be an increment of like 3 pixels if you're interested in that, 4 pixels. Whoa. And then you have just these numbers. I mentioned 3 pixels because we worked on Disney. We worked on both iOS and tvOS, and they had a scale multiplier of 3 pixels. So that was spicy, but it allowed you to build on both phone and television. But yeah, look into 3 pixels. Why not?
I'm still stuck on the 8-point grid system. You know, I tell designers to stick to that because it's just easier when you kind of build above. Yeah, I've never seen the free one. I'm gonna have a look at that one.
Yeah, but on this base tier, you have like numbers for spacing. You'll have numbers for like font size, line height. You could build that in there. Then above that is the semantic tier, which you'll have like primary, secondary. For instance, like we mentioned, red. You could have like error banner that could be referencing like red 100. Border could be referencing red 500 to make sure that it has a accessible border. The additional tier above that you could apply is you could have component specific tokens where you could have like red, you could just have a banner token, like banner rest state, and then the banner rest state could then hit on another token that is like down below. But I think that starts getting a bit more complicated. A friend of ours, friend of the program, Romina, who's been involved into design systems, is a big design token advocate, and she has a lot of good content that's available online.
Nice. Yeah, because I think it's one of the biggest things I see design systems really struggling with. It's really like, when's the context? Well, should the context be in the naming convention? And I think it's going to be an ongoing discussion for a while. I think there is no right or wrongs. I think it depends on, and I hate to use this word, but it really does depend on the maturity of your design system and your designers, that, you know, they do know that communication and when to use the right semantics and when to use the right color palettes at the right time. But I don't think that we'll ever find a concrete answer. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Whatever works best for you and that you could see scaling, I think is a solid.
Davey, I just want to wrap it up, and I guess what I want to hear from you is anyone that's coming into this design system field, and I think, you know, my personal opinion, I think UI designers should really know this, but people who are coming in from a development perspective or coming in as a beginner designer or UI designer, what advice would you give to them when they start to enter this field, and what are the right things that they should learn as they start to progress?
Yeah, I think the beautiful part about design systems is it encompasses like a few different disciplines. So I'll give some of the ones that are more like apparent. So visual design, like, could be a part of this, like heavy craft and heavy being able to apply like brand and visual design, working with other folks. There's a heavy aspect of like, you could have motion and like motion prototyping, that sort of thing. I think we are in a good seat to promote more designers developing quick and rapid prototypes. I think what others don't see as much as is like, I'm very much a program manager itself because I'm managing this whole thing in many cases, or like a large portion of this. And we have to have like a program management mindset where not only are we making sure that folks are satisfied, like we're getting continuous feedback. We are constantly communicating like our efforts and are as open as possible. But then there's lots of like rituals and lots of different ceremonies that we like to be a part of. And we like to utilize pilots to try to get all this stuff spun up. So like office hours obviously is one, but maybe there's other mechanisms of like helping folks. And this then sort of wraps up in really like understanding that we're a different type of team. We're a horizontal design team that is more service oriented. So like there's a different slant. There's a different slant on it. We're working for the people, the consumers of the product. But then we also need to be able to take a step back and use it to see like what the gaps are.
Nice. Brilliant. Well, Davy, it's been a pleasure speaking to you. I think I can speak to you for hours about design systems. I think I would love to just pull out all my developer knowledge, because I'm a developer by trade, but it's been a long time since I hit the keyboard. But I think you open my eyes to many, many things, like listening to you at workshops and speaking to you now. I think you have such a wealth of talent and knowledge, and I'm glad that you've come on to the show. So
thanks so much.
Really appreciate it. Really appreciate it.
Appreciate you. Thank you so much.
Nice one. Thank you.